To my next guest, Derrick Anderson, former Green Beret and a candidate for Congress in Virginia's 7th District, and a perspective that you don't often get. Derrick also is trained with the IDF in Israel, the Israeli Defense Forces, as many of our military personnel, special operations warriors have done over many years. Derrick, great to have you here. Thank you for your service in Afghanistan, Iraq. You know the Middle East well, and certainly, again, you have trained with the IDF, so let's get your perspectives on the war in Israel.
Yeah, thanks for having me, David. I want to take a brief moment to just kind of touch on some of the things that we're seeing the Biden administration and some of the things that him and Schumer have been saying, whether it be to Netanyahu or whether it be to what they're requesting the Israelis to do. I think if we look at really what's going on in Israel, it was only 6 months ago that Hamas came across their border and just did despicable acts against Israel, right? It's kind of disheartening to see, because if you were to we went back in time, back after 9/11, 6 months after 9/11, there would certainly not be the president or people in general saying that we need to have a ceasefire with Afghanistan. So that really disheartens me, especially considering, one of the stories I like to always talk, when I was training with the IDF in Israel, they brought me down to the edge of Gaza and showed me Gaza, what it looked like. They showed me some of the tunnel systems. They showed me on maps what the tunnel systems look like, how they disguise the entrances and exits of the tunnel systems, whether it be with schools, hospitals, and a lot of that has now come to fruition, right? We're seeing the Israelis and how they're using their media to show exactly what Hamas is doing. And so one of the things I always talk about is, Israelis sit in this hotbed in the Middle East, and obviously they're one of our, if not our closest allies in the Middle East, and they've been dealing with this for years. I mean, when we were down in the southern portion of Israel, I remember specifically there were some Americans sitting in a coffee shop while I was with the IDF, and it was towards the end of the evening, and they thought it was fireworks that were being shot in the air, when in fact it was rockets being shot from Gaza into Israel. Obviously, the Iron Dome had gotten a hold of them, and you see the explosion in the air, and so it's really tough for us sometimes as Americans. Imagine if Mexico was lobbing rockets over into Texas. What would our reaction be? And Israel deals with that every single day.
Yeah, good point. And I have been to where you're describing, down at, I think, I can't remember, was it Point Arrow, Gaza Command, and further. I mean, from 2005 to now, when it was turned over, it's such a remarkable change. Your point about the tunnel systems, what was seen then. Now, let's go to what's being done now. And as a Green Beret, certainly you have a perspective, having been trained as a Special Forces warrior, because Israel is not only going door to door under the buildings, they have to deal with a population that is in many ways, and according to many, including a former Hamas commander's son, compliant with what Hamas has done. Now, whatever reason they got to that point, they have to deal with that. It's like dealing with the gun in front of you, not necessarily the finger on the trigger, because what comes out is the same thing around. So with Israel going into Rafah, let's go into that a little bit more. From your experience having trained with them, and I don't know, did you train with the paratroopers, with the Golani Brigade? I don't know who you trained with, maybe with others. Maybe you can't tell us, as I know some of those trainings go, but you certainly have that experience.
Yeah, so without going into the units specifically, I trained with their special operations, specifically the guys that did the tunnel systems and the guys that do a lot of the explosive ordnance disposal. So those were the guys that I trained with specifically. And so we got some really good firsthand knowledge and training. I mean, when I say we trained with the Israelis, we were training with them because we were giving them some of our tactics, techniques, and procedures. But they were giving us some of their stuff too, which is, they're on a different kind of battlefield. But if you look at kind of the operational standpoint of how this has been done, right? In the first few weeks of Israel going into Gaza, they had to soften Gaza. That's why you saw a lot of airstrikes, a lot of artillery strikes, because they knew that there was these pockets of Hamas leadership, some of these buildings that they were, keeping weapons, the tunnel systems were starting. And then they started that slow creep from the north down to the south, where they had to go systematically clear buildings, houses. But with that, as you can imagine, David, because they had to have those strikes in the beginning, there's a lot of debris, whether it be on the roads, whether it be on the side. And so what does that bring? That brings two different obstacles. One, they're going to have to maneuver with vehicles to get down to Rafah, right? That means that they're going to have to systematically go through those roads and clear them, because some of the things that we saw in Iraq and Afghanistan is once you do demolish or, target a specific area, that the bad guys, what they tend to do is they want to put IEDs in that rubble. So as you're walking through, you think everything is clear, but at the same time, you have to re-clear the area for the guys on the ground in the vehicles, because they'll put explosives in that rubble. And it's very, very easy to make that look just like rubble in the area. So that's why it is a slow and steady, smooth process. And then that is not even taking into consideration the tunnel systems, which, again, there's still over 100 hostages, I believe, that Hamas still has. So not only are you clearing hostages you're clearing tunnels, you're clearing tunnels with potential hostages in there, which, again, just clearing the tunnels themselves with bad guys in them is one obstacle or one challenge. But doing it with the hostages in there as well, it adds a whole nother layer.
As you say that, I've seen a couple of reports recently, and I actually disagree with the approach on this reporting, that the idea that Hamas may not have enough hostages left to make a deal, whether they have 100 hostages, 50 hostages, or more than 100 hostages, the deal is what matters. The hostages are currency to a degree, but I wonder if we're not being twisted into believing that it's all reliant on the hostages rather than the tragic and potentially tragic reality. And to think about the Gaza Strip, for those out there who may wonder about it. Look, I remember being down there, and the day before I got there, one of the ministers had been down there and was in sniper range and was shot. He was shot in the butt, so we could make a laugh about it. But I went out in the same area. They weren't too happy with me because, you're now in sniper range, because Hamas always had their snipers targeting anyone and ready to go at a moment's notice. So it's not as if the Gaza Strip had this perfect wall and tunnels under it. They were ready to commit acts no matter what.
Yeah, and to your point too, David, if you remember when you were down there, remember back in Vietnam and even Iraq and Afghanistan, a lot of our watchtowers, you always had a soldier up in the watchtower manning the machine gun, and we had to put netting up so that we couldn't get hit with snipers. In Afghanistan and Iraq, if you look, the Israeli technology has really come really far. Specifically, if you look, they've got a lot of these, their machine guns and their weapon systems are mounted above the tower, and there's usually some IDF soldier with a camera underneath that's able to traverse that weapon system without being exposed to that sniper fire or any sort of fires for that matter. But you're exactly right. It is definitely a tough situation.